They had come so far. Out of bondage, out of chains. Out of the land that broke their backs and crushed their dreams. They followed the pillar by day, the fire by night, led not by a map, but by a promise. But now, the journey halted. The sea ahead, the army behind. No bridges, no boats, no escape. Mothers clutching children, elders leaning on staff, and in the eyes of the people, panic. This was the edge of impossible. They turned on the one who had led them this far. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die? Their fear screamed louder than their faith, but what they could not see was that God had led them there on purpose. Not to kill them, but to reveal himself. He had heard their cries, long before they ever knew how to pray. In the silence of their slavery, in the groans of their suffering, God was not distant. He was moving, watching, waiting. He was preparing a deliverer. Moses, once a prince in Pharaoh's courts, now a forgotten shepherd in the wilderness. 40 years of exile had stripped him of title, of ambition, of identity, but not of purpose. From a bush that burned but was not consumed, the voice of the Almighty thundered in a whisper, I have seen the misery of my people, I have heard their cries. I have come down to rescue them. And so Moses returned, not with an army, not with weapons, but with a rod in his hand and the word of the Lord in his mouth. Then came the plagues. Each one a blow to Egypt's gods, each one a sign. The Nile turned to blood, frogs, gnats, darkness. And finally, in the midnight hour, the cry that shook a kingdom, as death visited every home not covered by the blood of the Lamb, Pharaoh relented. Freedom came like a flood. The people gathered their things in haste, carrying bread that had no time to rise and hope that had been buried for generations. They left behind bricks and chains for wilderness and promise. But now, in the shadow of the sea, freedom looked like a setup, a dead end, or so it seemed. They stood with the sea before them and death behind them. The thunder of hooves grew louder with every heartbeat. Chariots, soldiers, the rage of Pharaoh unleashed. A wall of spears and fury barreling toward a defenseless people, and the sea, it did not move. No bridge, no boat, no sign of escape. Just endless water and rising fear. Their voices rose in accusation, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die? Fear made them forget the plagues, forget the Lamb, forget the God who had already shattered a kingdom to set them free. In that moment, faith faltered, but Moses did not waver. He lifted his voice, not to the people, but for them. Do not be afraid, he declared. Stand firm, you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The people stood trembling. And then came the word that changed everything, tell the people to move forward. Forward? Into the sea? Yes. Because sometimes God doesn't make a way, until you take a step into what looks like death. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the breath of God began to blow. The waters trembled, the wind howled through the night, and slowly, powerfully, impossibly, the sea began to part. Walls of water rose on either side, tall as towers, wild as thunder, and in between, a path of dry ground appeared where none had ever been. The people gasped. Some wept, some ran, clutching their children, stumbling in awe. They walked not on mud, but on miracle. Each step was a defiance of fear, each footprint a testimony to the faithfulness of God. Behind them, the pillar of cloud moved, shifting from before them to behind, casting darkness on Egypt and light on Israel. The enemy could not see, but God could, and he was not finished yet. When the last sandal left the seabed, Pharaoh's pride charged in. The chariots of Egypt thundered down the same path, racing between walls of water carved by the hand of God. They believed the road was theirs too, but what was mercy for God's people was judgment for his enemies. Then the Lord looked down through the pillar of fire and cloud, and the chaos began. Wheels jammed, horses reared, confusion swept through the ranks like a plague of its own. "Let us flee from the Israelites," they cried, "for the Lord fights for them against Egypt." But it was too late. Moses stretched out his hand once more, and at dawn, the sea returned to its strength. The waters came crashing down with holy vengeance, burying every chariot, every horse, every soldier. Not one survived. The God who opened the sea, closed it just as easily. The morning sun rose over a silent sea. The cries of Egypt were gone, the chains of yesterday buried beneath the waves. On the far shore, a nation stood in stunned silence, their sandals still damp, their hearts racing with awe. They had walked through death, and lived. Then a sound rose, first one voice, then many. A song. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." It was not just a celebration, it was remembrance. A declaration that their freedom was not by their own strength, but by the outstretched arm of the Almighty. Miriam danced, tambourine in hand, and the women followed with joy that shook the desert. They had seen the impossible, they had witnessed deliverance, and they would never forget the day the sea stood still, and let them pass. There will come a moment in every life when the waters rise and the enemy presses in, when the path ahead vanishes, and fear whispers, "This is the end." But the Red Sea was never just a story of escape, it was a revelation. A God who leads on purpose, even to the edge of the impossible. A God who waits until the last moment, not to delay, but to display. A God who parts seas, not just for Israel, but for anyone who dares to believe. So when you find yourself trapped between what was and what could be, when Pharaoh breathes down your neck and the waves mock your faith, lift your eyes, raise your hands, and move forward. Because the same God who parted the sea then, still makes a way now.